is that our world, the world that we live in, things can eat at us. Our fears, our frustrations, our doubts can grab us by the shirt and just shake us to our very core. Funny experience, though, just to light the mood for a minute. A funny experience happened to Lord Halifax, who was a politician in England at the time. And he was once sharing a railway compartment on his journey with two very prim, very severe-looking spinsters. These women were sitting there, very prim and proper with him. And they entered a tunnel right before they got to the destination. And suddenly they were in utter darkness. And for whatever reason, maybe Lord Halifax had an armory streak, I don't know. He started kissing his hand, going, and then suddenly they're in the light again. And he stands up and he says this, "May I thank whichever one of you two ladies I am indebted to for the charming incident in the tunnel." And then he walks out, leaving these two women glaring at each other like, "Was it you? It had to be you. It wasn't me." The doubts, the frustration, the different, sometimes it can eat us alive. I can imagine what these two ladies were going through and the judgmental attitudes they were going through after this time. But doubt's a part of life. Doubt is something that we deal with as Christians. Job 4:17 says this. It says, "Can a mortal be more righteous than God? Can even a strong man be more pure than his maker?" And we look at that statement, and of course it's ridiculous. But it's a thought-provoking question. And it's one that sometimes I think we almost want to believe when we see terrible things happen around us. We almost think that we could do a better job. We live in a world where disasters happen, where natural disasters kill not only wicked people, but good people. We ask this question, why do bad things happen to good people? Why is it that millions of babies are aborted every year and no one does anything? Why is it that literally millions of mainly women and children are in sex trafficking? They're victims of sex trafficking. Little kids being raped daily. Why is that allowed? Why doesn't God just step in and squash them? Why doesn't He change things? And in those times when we allow that despair and that doubt to hit us, when we focus on that negativity and everything else, it is really, really easy to come up with this question, well, maybe I could do it better. Boy, if I was God, I wouldn't allow this. I would change things. Doubts about our faith, doubts about who God is, come in. If we view God, though, as perfect and good, as the one who sets those standards, if you had a dictionary, you opened them up, and you looked at perfection, it would say God. You looked at good, it would say God. If we really have that biblical view of who God is, then we know that it's impossible for the creation somehow to be greater than the Creator, for us to somehow be better than God. But when despair sets into our lives, so do doubts. So do doubts. Norman Shirk, in 1981, he was at Dallas Seminary. He wrote this poem And let me ask you, as I read this, I want you to think, can you relate to this? He says, let me meet you on the mountain, Lord, just once. You wouldn't have to burn a whole bush, just a few smoking branches. And I would surely be your Moses. Let me meet you on the water, Lord, just once. You wouldn't have to be on White Rock Lake, just on a puddle, after the annual Dallas rain. And I would surely be your Peter. Let me meet you on the road, Lord, just once. You wouldn't have to blind me on North Central Expressway, just a few bright lights on the way to chapel, and I would surely be your Paul. Let me meet you, Lord, just once. Anywhere, anytime. Just meeting you in the Word. It's so hard sometimes. Must I always be your Thomas? Because, quite frankly, oftentimes, where we know God, where we learn about God is in the Word. And we don't get the walking on water bit. We don't get the flash of light on the Damascus Road. We don't get all of those things, those miracles. And sometimes when despair gets in, we wonder, where's God? And we allow the doubts to eat in us. Job. We've been studying Job. Job had a hedge around him. He had protection. He had the good life. And then suddenly it's ripped away. It's ripped away from him. His possessions, his livelihood, his career, his family, and then his health. All are taken from him. And Job, as righteous and as blameless a man as he is, Job succumbs to doubts. Job succumbs to despair. I mean, he's not a perfect man. And in his despair, he cries out because he's hit rock bottom and the cracks are beginning to happen in his character. Look at his words in Job 3, 11 through 12. He says, why did I not perish at birth and die as I came from the womb? Why were there knees to receive me and breasts that I might be nursed? He's saying, I wish I was dead. I mean, what point? Why was I even born if I'm going to go through this? Maybe not in a long season, but if you ever got to a point where you just wonder, why was I born? I wish I was dead. I'm not saying you turn suicidal, but you got to the point where you're going, why? Why, Lord? Job is sitting in that state. He's not about to take one of those potsherds and cut his throat, but he's sitting in that state going, Lord, I wish I was dead. Just kill me now. And if you read Job, he says that a lot. You know, it's just kill me. Because quite frankly, what is the purpose of living? You and I may never have suffered for no obvious reason, like Job did. But all of us face times of despair. We face times when we studied so hard for a test and we bombed. We studied so hard to make the grade, to be who other people expect us to be, or who we expect ourselves to be, and we fail. And it doesn't just have to be at school. It can mean your parents maybe, you know, you've walked this way, we trust you, and you sin somehow, and you fail them, you let them down. You fail yourself in the process too, with God. You feel, how can I do it? We get to the point where someone dies or a dream dies, or whatever, as they talked about in the video, and we get to the point of saying, is it worth it? Is it worth going? All of us face times of despair, but can we limit them? Or better still, can we somehow, in those times of despair, can we somehow find light in the darkness? Can we somehow find hope? As Christians, we are given tools, ways to combat the darkness. First and foremost, we need to identify the real enemy. We need to identify the real enemy. As we've talked about, Job lives in a culture that believed that the blessings or the curses one received in life were due to how one lived. I mean, if you lived a good life, if you were a good dude, if you were a good person, you're going to be blessed. If you are evil, if you're wicked, you're going to be cursed. Does that always work? No. We see in other passages, why did the wicked prosper? Right? It doesn't always work that way. But in Job's mindset, in his culture's mindset, it was very much a cause and effect thing. People looked at Job and Job's life and all the blessings. Well, Job's a good guy. He's blameless and upright. But when it falls apart, guess what? Job, you've got to be wicked. There must be some secret sin. There must be something in your life that is cause of this. But is there truth in the idea that if you live a good life, you're going to be blessed? Is there truth in the fact that if you live an evil life, you're probably going to have problems? Yes, there's a lot of truth in that. If you do keep your nose clean, if you live a pretty good life, things good oftentimes happen to you because it is a cause and effect. And if you go out and you're mean and you're vicious and you steal from people, you know what? It's all going to come back to you too, because it is a cause and effect in many ways. But that's not the whole truth. And that's what we need to recognize. If it's the whole truth that it's all cause and effect, then Christianity is a lie. Christianity is a lie if it's all cause and effect. Why? Because under this belief system that it's all cause and effect, one earns everything one gets, whether good or bad. And religions out there teach that. And there's practically every single one except Christianity. They teach that it's all about how you live, how many things you do, how many alms you give, how many sacrifices you make, how many avoidance of this or whatever, and that will somehow bring you whatever the salvation in that religion is. Yes, Christianity does deal with the fact that we need to have a code of behavior. We need to be living for God. But there's something else there. It's grace. It's grace. By God's grace we are saved. Not by something we've done. If you haven't done so, you need to memorize this. Ephesians 2, 8 and 9. It says, "For it is by grace you've been saved, through faith. And this is not from yourselves, it's the gift of God. Not by works, so that no one can boast." That should be emblazoned on your heart. Realize, it's not up to us. God reached out to us first. God wanted you. He reached out to you. And He called you by His Holy Spirit into His kingdom. You made a choice. Yes, absolutely. We all have a choice. But it's because the choice was given to you. That you had the grace of God leading you into not something you earned, not because he looked at you or me and said, well, that's a great person. They deserve this. No, it's not because of that. It's because God, in His grace, loves us. Unfortunately, though, Job and his society tells him that that's not the case. Job's society is missing this. They're in the dark about this idea of grace. Now, is this because that grace just God changed His mind? God suddenly decided that grace was a good idea? No, we see grace from the very beginning. I mean, when man first sinned, what happened? Yeah, they got kicked out of the garden. God made them close. When Cain messed up, he killed his brother. That's a pretty bad sin. And he's going to be punished, and he's saying, this punishment is too much for me. God gives him the mark. He gives him grace. And we see over and over God's grace. Sometimes we forget that. Sometimes we're missing it. Job has faithfully served God, but he's missing much of the bigger picture. Something he's going to admit later on, by the way. And he's also not aware of what God and Satan had talked about. And because of this, he's unaware of the real enemy that's out there. Remember, it talks about that there was a couple of instances, right, when the angels and Satan present themselves before God. And he asked Satan, where were you? What were you doing? And what did Satan say? Do you remember? What? Going back and forth along the earth. Look at 1 Peter 5:8. See if this rings a bell. Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. Look at the same picture, right? Satan, our adversary, is out there trying to trip us up, trying to cause us to fall. I'm not trying to take personal responsibility away, because we do have personal responsibility. But we need to understand that we are in a battlefield. We are in a war between Satan and his forces and God's. And that's the real enemy. When we see the fact that our world is crumbling, our world has all of these problems, it's because we're in a battle. And yes, personal responsibility within that battle. But we're in a battle against good and against evil. We live in a fallen world where bad things happen. Therefore, we must avoid blaming God for life's calamities. We must avoid blaming God for life's calamities. When bad things happen, we look for a reason. A culprit. And if it's not us, then we blame someone else. Well, it's got to be our parents. My parents raised me this way. That's why I act this way. Or it's society. Society as a whole has caused this, and that's why bad things are happening. And if we can't find any other person, any other culprit, we blame God. We look at it, well, God, you created all this. It's ultimately your fault. But that's a limited view. That doesn't take into account that we have an enemy. Job, though, in his mindset and where he's coming from, he's pretty sure that he hasn't sinned. Looks at his life, he sees his problems, and his mindset says, if it's coming on me, it must be because I sinned. But he can't see his sin. And so his worldview is shaken. How can I be suffering if I can't find out how I sinned? And so he cries out to God. He says, show me. Please. Forgive me. Just tell me what I need to be forgiven for. Show me what my sin is. And God is silent. So he's completely confused. And he ends up defending himself. Look at Job 6, 24 through 30. He says, teach me, and I'll be quiet. Show me where I've been wrong. How painful are honest words, but what do your arguments prove? Do you mean to correct what I say and treat my desperate words as wind? He's talking to his friends here, he says. You would even cast lots for the fatherless and barter away your friend. But now, be so kind as to look at me. Would I lie to your face? Relent, do not be unjust. Reconsider, for my integrity is at stake. Is there any wickedness on my lips? Can my mouth not discern malice? He's talking to his friends who've been accusing him, and he's saying, look, do you see this in my life? Because I sure don't. I sure don't. I'm sitting here in despair, and you guys are saying, well, Joe, you know, the wicked get punished and the good get blessed, so there must be something in you. Come on, admit it. There must be something wrong. And he's like, you know me. God knows me. But who can Job blame in his culture other than himself? Like I said, according to his worldview, it has to be him. So he's saying, what is the sin? In his despair, he cries out to God. Job 7, 17 to 21. He says, what is mankind that you make so much of them? That you give them so much attention? That you examine them every morning and test them every moment? Will you never look away from me? Or let me alone even for an instant? If I've sinned, what have I done to you, you who see everything we do? Why have you made me your target? Have I become a burden to you? Why do you not pardon my offenses and forgive my sins? For I will soon lie down in the dust. You will search for me, but I will be no more. You know, when I listen to those words, Job is not going quietly. Job is screaming out to God. And if you read through this, if you read how Job reacts, because much of the book of Job is his friends accusing him and him responding and him crying out to God. And he is really, literally screaming. This righteous, upright man is screaming, and yet he never lays the blame. He toes the line, but he never lays the blame at God's feet. He never accuses God of wrongdoing. He gets to the point of fatalism, like, well, you know, I'm just a pot, basically, and God has made me, and if he decides to crush me, both the good and the wicked, he can do that. But he never blames God. But he gets to the point where he is in utter despair. When bad things happen, too many times we end up, though, blaming God. And we shouldn't. We may suffer for things we have done, or we may be victims of the evil in this world. But don't blame God for it. Never blame God for it. Because God is good. God is just. God is perfect. And don't fall into the trap of saying a tragedy has to be God's judgment. Don't fall into that trap. And that's one that Job's friends do. In Job 8:4. Bildad's talking here. Job 8:4. And Bildad says this, and this is a great thing to say to people, to someone who's just lost their family. But when your children sinned against him, he gave them over to the penalty of their sin. Thank you very much. It's very comforting. I feel better already. Really? But we do. We have to blame somebody, and we sit up in our righteous chair, and we look down at others, and we say, oh, well, this tragedy has happened to you or happened to them. You know, these people that got killed in Haiti or Bahamas or whatever. It's God's judgment. God's judgment on these evil people. Who says? Who says? Who made you God? We know from this story that their deaths, who's responsible? They're Satan's doing, right? We know that we learned that from the story. And that is something that we can learn from Job. We can learn that tragedies happen, but they are not necessarily our fault, the result of our sin, or someone else's sin. Because sometimes it's just a matter of the fact that the world is evil. And that Satan and his forces are evil. You may go all the way back, though. You say, well, wait a minute. But God created everything. So God somehow allows evil to exist. Therefore, God must be blamed. Don't go. Yes, God allows evil to exist for now. Because mankind, and even Satan, had a choice. He didn't make robots. But it won't be that way forever. And that one day we know that evil will be destroyed. God does, in His sovereignty, allow evil to exist for now. We need to trust His heart. We need to trust that He sees the bigger picture. That He knows what He's doing, and that He allows these things to happen for a reason. We may never comprehend that reason. But we need to trust Him. And we need to never relinquish our faith. Never relinquish our faith. Job is frustrated. He is confused. He's feeling battered from all sides. But listen to his words of faith. Job 19, 23 through 27. Oh, that my words were recorded, that they were written on a scroll, that they were inscribed with an iron tool on lead, or engraved in rock forever. I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end He will stand on the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. I myself will see Him with my own eyes. I and not another. How my heart yearns. This is a man who is at the very bottom, and yet he can save us. You see in other parts where he says, even though He slay me, yet will I trust Him. For Job, he's never relinquishing his faith in God. Following Christ, you and I will sometimes face some tough times. But we need to realize that our strength ultimately lies in Him. We've talked about Corrie ten Boom many times. I want you to think about what it must have been like to live in a concentration camp. To see your friends and others just waste away, to realize that you are one step away from being raped, from being killed, from being abused. To live in that fear, to live in that despair, to know that there is no hope that you can see. And yet, when she emerges from that, and with her sister, there is light in that darkness. When she emerges from that, she's stronger. Christ has brought her through the tough times. And quite frankly, the ministry of Corrie ten Boom would not be what it is if it hadn't been for the You and I may be going through some really, really hard things. We may be going through some tough things. The thing is, what does God want to do with it? What is His purpose? How is He going to take what you are going through and make it into something for the Lord's? You may not be able to see that. You may be in the middle of it and think there is no way any good can come out of this. Trust Him. Trust that somehow He has a plan. And you will, as you cling to Him, you will emerge victorious out of this. Even when God was silent, Job still knew that he was the only one who could turn to. Do it. When God is silent, do you still cling to Him? Do you still trust Him? Which brings us to our big question of the day. Who do you turn to in times of despair? You turn to the internet. You turn to, a lot of people turn to various kinds of addiction. All of us will face the times of despair. But we don't have to go it alone. We need to remember who the real enemy is. We need to not blame God for life's troubles. But always have faith in Him. Because that's the only way to somehow emerge victorious from despair. Yes, Father God, thank you for your love and your guidance. Thank you, Lord, that even in the hard times, even in times where we feel there are no answers, that you're always there. And help us not to ever get to the point where we blame you for our problems. But instead, help us always to trust you, to cling to you, God. Help us always to persevere, Lord, in the depression, which comes to all of us. And have the confidence to know that we will emerge into the light as we cling to you. In Christ.
The distinct joy to enter into a time of tithes and offerings. I first come there. thank you that you have blessed us in many, many ways. And you go through with us through the hard times, through the joys and the tears. You're always there. We just bless you and thank you for it. I pray a blessing upon this offering, O Lord. May it be used for your kingdom's glory in Jesus' name. Amen.